Artificial intelligence isn't replacing advisors. It's replacing the drudgery that keeps advisors from doing their best work. You think for a moment that advisors can now create scenario planning in seconds. And firms can benchmark themselves continuously. And then client communications, as you know, they become richer, more strategic, more human.
Welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing You, the podcast for the future of wealth management. Thanks for being here. I'm Marla Sofer. Money is a tool. It empowers people. Let's dive into how technology is personalizing advice, strengthening connections, and creating lasting impact. If you're an advisor looking to differentiate, a fintech leader shaping the next wave, or a client ready to take control of your financial future, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. Today, we are excited to welcome Jim Roth, a financial services veteran with over 4 decades of experience and a deep passion for helping firms build stronger, more personalized relationships with their clients. Jim has held senior roles at major institutions like BNY Mellon Pershing, Oyster Consulting, and now Ascentix Partners, where he brings a unique mix of business development savvy and empathy-driven client service. As a former financial advisor himself, Jim understands the challenges that investors face and how firms can meet them with tailored, scalable solutions. He's built a career around listening first, solving second, and always focusing on what really matters, human connection. Outside the office, Jim is an endurance athlete and an active contributor to several industry organizations like FINRA and the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association. Jim and I met years and years ago when he was at Pershing. I'm delighted to have him here, and welcome, Jim, to the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast.
Marla, thanks for the opportunity. Really excited about this conversation.
Likewise, I'm honored and thrilled. We always start by asking our guest, what excites you about the moment that we're in right now about the future of wealth management?
Well, Marla, considering that we're in the first month of this new year and connecting with a number of my peers, there's a sense of excitement about this moment in wealth management. And it's not just the usual technology is changing everything. Marla, I truly believe that the industry it's hitting a convergent point. It's the convergent point of the structural, the demographics, and the technological forces that are all shifting at once. And that kind of inflection point doesn't happen often. So in my opinion, there's a few forces that are making this moment genuinely exciting. First, as you know, there's a shift from products to personalized systems. For decades, wealth management has been built around product shelves, model portfolios, and standardized processing. Now we're entering in an era that advice is becoming hyper-personalized through artificial intelligence, in which, Marla, as you know, you almost can't have a conversation without discussing how the impact of AI is impacting our industry. So I get it. But, portfolios are also adapting dynamically to client behavior and client goals and associated risk signals. So you see, I think it's the first time personalization and efficiency aren't trade-offs. Then there's also the renewed interest in integrated ecosystems. Based on my experiences, custodians, clearing firms, and fintechs are no longer separate universes. They're now becoming interoperable platforms. So what does that mean? Well, data flows without friction.
I know the question was about the future of wealth, but do you think that for any wealth firm today, would they agree with that statement that data flows without friction?
No. I have to tell you this. My old partner at Beta Next, Steve Daffron, he would constantly focus on a frictionless experience.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a moment. What have you and I experienced today that is clunky, it's not integrated, and not fun? It's not a fun overall experience. I'm sure we have all examples of that. But you also think about, there's firms and advisors that are now having the luxury of stitching together what they believe to be the best-in-class tools. And Marla, also, there's a number of firms today that are exploring the evolution of self-clearing as a strategic lever and not just an operational choice. So the generation wealth handoff, I think it's finally real.
Yeah, I actually love so much of what you said, but I really love the idea that personalization and efficiency aren't trade-offs. You can deliver both. You can create an amazing client experience, and you can do it with efficiency and in an effective way using systems that you choose, because now the systems have made it much more possible for you to kind of break down the barriers as an advisor and use the ones that are best for your use case, your clients, the outcomes you're looking to deliver. And I know that saying that, and I know that talking about self-clearing might have kind of created some heartburn a couple of years back for you. So nice going. There's a lot of evolution saying, look, it doesn't have to be clearing through this custodian that has a lot of rigidity in the way that it works as a strategy. There's options now on the table.
Marla, we talked about this generational wealth. We've talked about it for the last 15 years. Now it's actually happening. And
Right.
What excites me isn't just the trillions of assets that are moving, it's the mindset shift. The younger clients are expecting transparency, the digital fluency, and the values alignments. Clients want advisors to act like partners, not gatekeepers. And clients are going to reward firms that communicate clearly and authentically. So you see, I think AI should be thought of as a co-advisor, not a threat. Artificial intelligence isn't replacing advisors. It's replacing the drudgery that keeps advisors from doing their best work. You think for a moment that advisors can now create scenario planning in seconds, and firms can benchmark themselves continuously. And then client communications, as you know, they become richer, more strategic, more human. So yes, going back to your original question, the competitive landscape is changing. The old guard of custodians and broker dealers and clearing firms and hedge funds, they're now being challenged by API native platforms. They're being challenged by direct indexing engines. And of course, the importance of real-time infrastructure. That's what it is. And that's why I go back to my exciting comment, because it really creates room for a bold strategy. There's new entrants, there's differentiated operating models, as you talked about. So we're entering a period where now the industry can finally be both deeply human and deeply scalable. And I truly don't believe that combination has existed before.
Amazing. I couldn't agree more. I think it's fantastic. I think that you pair that also with the fact that this new generation has a lot more, call it just financial literacy. They have a lot more access to knowledge. And I think they know that they're not going to get a huge amount of differentiation based off of who's doing their investments. They're not even seeking necessarily performance as the outcome. They know that that's kind of a fool's errand, a lot of these savvy investors, and that the investing is largely outsourced. So going back to this personalization and really changing the way that this next generation wants to engage to achieve their goals, I want to come a little bit back into something that is uniquely Jim. And I've said to you this before, Jim, I don't mean to embarrass you on the call, but I think you are the best salesperson I've ever worked with. You are just a phenomenal, you are phenomenal. And part of that is because you are excellent at building relationships and listening. It's a huge part of your approach. And it's a huge part of this future of wealth that we just talked about, listening and then differentiating the service based off of what a client's needs are and what they're actually looking to gain, the outcomes that they want in the context of their own lives. So I'm wondering, what advice do you have to help firms become better listeners?
Marla, you make me smile with this question, because I want to tell you what, firms love to say they listened, but very few actually do. And I'm not trying to be controversial, but the gap between what clients articulate and what firms hear is widening as expectations, shift faster than most organizations can adapt to. I believe that firms that win in the next decade, they're going to be the ones that treat listening as not as a soft skill, but almost like a operating discipline. And here's how that discipline comes to life. If you listen for signals and not just sentences, and this is something actually, Marla, I've learned from you. I really have. Clients rarely say what they mean directly. How they reveal it is through behavior. And Marla, you know much more better about it than I do. But what they click, what they ignore, and what they revisit. Then there's the timing element. When they reach out, when they go radio silent. Then there's the emotional cues like hesitation, frustration, and uncertainty. And then the last thing is there's that channel choice. Marla, how do they communicate? Do they do it via email or via text? Are they leveraging your website? Do they prefer a phone call? See, my sense is depending upon the situation, it's that same client will communicate differently in different ways. So going back to your question, my point is mostly firms only capture the words. And I think their goal is to really capture the patterns. And that's where AI can become a force multiplier. Surfacing their sentiment skills, their friction points, their emerging needs, long before the human hears them themselves. And then, Marla, the next real challenge is really to integrate listening across the entire ecosystem. You see, in my opinion, listening is still fragmented. Advisors hear one thing, service teams hear another. Digital platforms may capture a third. Don't forget compliance. They see risk signals. And then marketing sees engagement data. But my point is, few organizations stitch all these things together. And that's where I'm thinking that firms that excel building somewhat of a unified client intelligence layer, call it whatever it may be, that's going to be a single view of what clients are saying, doing, and needing across every touch point. And what it does, it transforms listening to another level of actionable possibilities. Marla, I've heard you say it many times before, and I really mean this. Moments matter. So imagine a firm that treats client feedback as continuous, visual, and tied to specific interventions. That's the future. Clients just don't want to be heard. They want to see evidence that their voices matter.
I think that's right. I would add a couple of things I actually spoke to an advisor today, and it goes back to the answer that you offered to the first question. Is you mentioned that a lot of firms think they're listening and you're not sure they do. When I sometimes speak to advisors, it's not only that they think they're listening, they're very confident that they know everything there is to know about their client. And sometimes when we have conversations about, hey, do you want to know more? They're like, no, I know everything there is to know about my client. And then you hear stats like 81% of heirs fire their parents' advisor. And you hear stats about at any transition, that client's gone. When that friction comes down in the shifting, then clients recognize who actually is building those deep relationships and who's not. And so I think everything you're saying about recognizing it's not only about, can I invest their portfolio? Can I pick up on their emotional cues? Can I transition myself from a company that offers products and invest a portfolio to one that solves their problems, knowing their context, knowing their emotions, understands what matters to them, and speaks in language that resonates? So here, going on to the next question, that's something you've done really well. As you have developed multiple businesses and you've got an incredible track record building sales teams and running sales yourself, that is what I hear time and again that advisors want most. They are looking for organic growth. And so what advice do you have for advisors who might be listening, who are aiming at that business development side, as at the same time, you have more and more companies selling the same suite of products? They've got an estate plan, I've got an estate plan. They've got an insurance policy, I've got an insurance policy. So how do you build that trust in a relationship-centric framework?
That's a good question, Marla, because, trust is becoming now the true currency of wealth management, especially now that, as you said, products and platforms and portfolios, they're all increasingly interchangeable. In a commoditized environment, the advisors who rise above the noise, they're the ones who treat relationship building as a craft, not as a tact. Some examples of the better advisors from the great advisors, I guess I could say, is sometimes what they do is they engage the client with curiosity, not credentials.
The listening. We're coming back to the listening. It's about the client. Yeah.
Most advisors, what they do is they open up their meeting with their value proposition or their elevator pitch.
Right.
I think the best advisors, what they do is they have a genuine interest and they know that the clients can feel the difference instantly. So I think the stronger relationship builders, they ask questions that reveal what matters, not what's marketable. They notice what the client doesn't say. They explore, motivations and fears and aspirations before talking about solutions. And Marla, with the Know Me platform you created, that recognizes all of that. You see, I believe more so that curiosity signals respect. And of course, respect builds trust. It also makes the client feel known and not managed. In the world of templated plans and automated workflows, that personalization is really the new luxury. That's the key. So that's how I would answer that question. I just throw one last thing at you is that, what's the difference between an advisor who says, hey, here's your plan, to changing that conversation to saying, here's the plan that fits the way you think, you decide, and you live. See how that changes everything into the whole conversation? The advisors, I think, have to be better teachers rather than simply tellers. And I'm not referring to bank tellers. What I'm saying is, you're the expert, teach me. I think clients trust advisors who make them feel smarter.
What if financial planning wasn't just about numbers, but about you, your values, your goals, your vision for the future? Nomi is transforming client discovery for wealth managers, going beyond assets and risk scores to uncover what truly matters. With behavioral insights and real-time data, Nomi helps advisors personalize advice, build deeper connections, and grow their businesses. Because the best financial decisions start with knowing you. Discover the future of client engagement at nomi.com. I think so too. I think a lot of clients, and I hear this a lot, the client just wants to feel like, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I going to be okay? And the only way to answer that is to understand, what does okay mean? Like, the client really, really cares about that. One of the things that we found in Nomi is the client doesn't know how to articulate the right things that the advisor needs to hear. And to date, there haven't been that many tools for the advisors to use. There's so many tools for portfolio optimization and tax optimization and planning and portfolio compliance and statements. And all of these things offer ways that I can talk about your assets. We have very few ways to talk about you and make sure that I'm guiding you to tell me what I need to hear so that I can then respond back in your context. And that's really what Nomi looks to solve. I'm curious for your thoughts on, as firms get into more scalability, they're aiming to grow. How can they preserve that human connection that really brings in that client context?
Digital scale and human connection, they don't have to be opposing forces. In fact, I think firms that get this moment right will use digital scale to amplify humanity, not replace it. The trick is dividing and designing systems where technology handles the mechanical work, so advisors can show up more personally, more thoughtfully, and more consistently. I think there's a couple of ways that you can make that possible. Use the technology to create context, not distance. Most digital advice platforms, they just focus on efficiency, but the best ones focus on understanding. When technology platforms like Nomi, they capture the preferences, the behavior, the communication patterns, and the life events. It gives the advisor a richer, more accurate picture of the client than they could ever maintain manually. So digital scale becomes a way to know the clients better, not less. And again, let AI handle the prep so advisors can handle the person. Advisors lose hours every week to data gathering, note-taking, follow-up tasks, portfolio comparisons, and meeting prep. But when AI does that work, then the advisor can spend more of their time prepping it to ask for deeper questions, to explore motivations, and then noticing emotional cues, connecting the dots around the conversations that you had before. So I just think the personal connection strengthens because the advisor is fully present. Clients don't want more messages. They want messages that make them feel like they were written for them. You think back at firms that send 10,000 messages out, but yet the difference is if you could feel that those messages are directed towards the individual client, those one-on-one conversations, that's what takes the relationship to a different level.
Yeah, I really love what you said about tech creating context, not distance. And to me, it makes me feel like the stockbroker of the 80s who wore a very fancy suit, and a huge part of his role, it was always a his, usually, I would say 99.9%, a huge part of his role was creating, as you say, distance. I'm more sophisticated than you. I'm following the markets. This is a lot for any, person on the street to handle. And so I'm actually better equipped to kind of do these things because I'm more in the thick. I've got, I don't want to say inside information. That's a loaded term, but I know how these markets operate. You don't. Let me do it for you. There's distance. Today, that argument doesn't work. And the reason is because everyone's got access to the markets. You can actually ask AI to explain anything to you in a way that resonates more for you than an advisor might. I'm curious. So you were a financial advisor. I don't know if it was in the 80s or if that was offensive, that image of like the stockbroker with the fancy suit calling out of the phone book. I feel like I have some right. Like my dad was that. So my dad started at Merrill in 1984, literally called out of the phone book as a stockbroker, selling IBM shares to whoever would buy them, creating this like, hey, I've got something you want and I've got special access to it that you can't get. That has super changed. How have you seen from the time you were an advisor until now client expectations evolve? And where are you seeing tools and strategies that you think can help advisors today with the evolving demand and where advisory solutions are just not keeping up?
Marla, full disclosure, I started about 5 years after your dad. So just want to put things in perspective here. But, I think what's fascinating about the evolution of the client expectations that it hasn't been a single shift. You think of an ocean. It's actually been a series of overlapping waves. And each one has kind of raised the bar in a different way. And I think together they've reshaped what good advice actually means. From my perspective, here's how the landscape has changed and what actually helps advisors keep up. Client expectations have evolved. When your father and I got involved a long, long time ago, before it was clients would evaluate you based on performance. Now it's partnership. Years ago, clients judged advisors primarily on the returns and the product selection. Today, they judge them on clarity, responsiveness, emotional intelligence, and the ability to simplify complexity. That's where I think clients want a thinking partner. They don't necessarily, no disrespect, they don't want a portfolio manager. They want a thinking partner that's going to help navigate. As I mentioned before, clients don't want the tell me approach. It's more like a teach me. Client used to accept the opaque explanations of, now they want transparency, they want education, they want insights into why the decisions were actually made so they can walk away smarter, not just reassured. Also, they're evolving from the annual review. Remember those? You'd have an annual review with the advisor. And now it's changed to a always on approach. The old cadence of quarterly calls or annual plans, that feels archaic now. Today's expectations are more of a proactive outreach, real-time updates, digital visibility really into the financial life. It's from one size fits all to, hey, this feels like me. That I think is the difference. And that's where, personalization comes into play. We talked about it earlier, but, personalization used to mean just remembering birthdays. Now it's tailored communications, it's recommendations. It's have those recommendations aligned with values. It's planning that reflects how they think and make decisions. Clients want to feel known, not processed. It evolves from an advisor as an expert to really as an advisor as a collaborator. And I think the younger generation, they don't want to be told what to do. What they want is co-creation, kind of a shared decision-making, and they want transparency around the trade-offs. So it goes back to the point that you and I talked about earlier. The advisor becomes a guide, not a gatekeeper, so that, the tools and strategies can actually help advisors meet these expectations, looking over that unified client intelligence portal that you're building. So that's how I would think things have changed from the past to really where they're at today.
If you were going to have to put a percentage of how many are there, 350, let's say 350,000 advisors today in the US, how many of them are still the annual review? I kind of meet up, show you my kind of performance review and all your pie charts, and then I say goodbye until next year. And how many of them are actually evolving to this new way of engaging with their clients?
Unfortunately, I wish more were evolving, but you go through the old school mentality, and it's something that I've learned a long time ago in my career is that, it's the aging of the workforce. And unfortunately, our industry is not as appealing as it once was. But I think with the transition of the assets, it's the younger advisors that are really following the work streams of the older advisors. And it's, as you know very well, Marla, it's human nature to resist change.
Mm-hmm. Advisors are pretty good at that.
Yeah. But I think, here's the other thing. I don't think client expectations, they haven't just risen, they've expanded. What the clients now want, they want the convenience of digital. They want the wisdom of a human. They want the personalization of a boutique. They want the transparency of a partner. And finally, they want the proactivity of a concierge. If you can combine all that, then you're in a much, much, much better and a more effective relationship than you have, at least in the past. So I think that's where those waves that I referred to before, that's what's driving the current environment and the demands that are out there. And I think the really successful advisors are going to have to adapt. If they don't, unfortunately, like that transition you referred to earlier, the transitioning of the assets, they're not going to stay with that current advisor. It's not going to happen.
I think that's a spot on advice. All of this has been great. Jim, I want to ask the last question we always ask here on the podcast is, what is an instance in your life, a conversation you've had that has entirely changed your relationship with money personally?
This is a tough question, but it really made me stop and think. And it took me a while to come up with. But over the years, I've been very fortunate. I've interacted with thousands of advisors, hundreds of firms. And I think there's a pattern that shows up consistently. And what it is, it's the moment when someone realizes that money is not actually about money. I've seen it play out countless forms. It's a conversation that changes everything. It usually starts with someone asking something like, what does enough look like for you? Not how much you need, not what's your number, not when do you want to retire? Marla, it's that simple word of enough. I think it's a word that bypasses the brain and goes straight to the emotional core. And what if clients answer that question with stories, not spreadsheets? They talk about what they want to be, not what they want to buy. They reveal their thoughts on security, freedom, the family, goals, not I want higher returns or I need a perfect plan or I want to beat the market. It's the admission that money is emotional and it's symbolic. And I think it's deeply tied to the identity. And the relationship with money moves from scarcity to fear to clarity to alignment. It's that moment that matters so much because it reveals the truth most people never articulate. Money is a proxy for safety, freedom, and belonging. And once you understand that underlying need, I think the financial decisions become clearer. And that's the moment. That's what it is. And I bet that many advisors built their career or relationships, they've witnessed that moment too. It's a moment when conversation stops being about dollars and starts being about the person. And that's where trust is born. That's where the real planning comes in. And in my opinion, Marlon, that's where the work really becomes meaningful. So I really appreciated that question because it made me reflect, but that's the question that comes out. And I invite you to share with the audience to have some of the advisors ask that question. And the question is really, what does enough look like for you? See if it works, because I think it'll change the conversations that you might have had in the past.
That's fantastic, Jim. And I feel like it's so aligned with a lot of what we talk about here. This whole podcast is about the future of wealth. And we talk a lot about money is a tool and money is not the goal. And so many people have been brainwashed, misled. I think they go down this path of chasing money as their goal, and they don't find the fulfillment and the meaning and the joy and the actual experience in life that they're looking for. I'm very grateful to you, Jim, for being here on the podcast and sharing your wisdom. There were a tremendous number of clips and sound bites that I hope a lot of advisors and practitioners that are delivering into wealth. And we have a lot of audience listeners that are just people who are looking to get more out of their wealth. They're looking to just make better decisions and feel better about their money. And I think you spoke to all of those audiences. You have always had, as I said, a relationship first approach. You've had decades of experience, and you gave us a great reminder that while tech is changing the game, human connection is still at the heart of great advice. I would say your success and my always being impressed with you as a salesperson has always been because you are so human-centric. You are the picture of integrity and have always been just a wonderful person that I've appreciated in every way. Where can our listeners go to learn more about Ascentix, you, or connect with you directly?
Sure. I would just invite everybody to go to AscentixPartners.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn as well, Jim Roth at Ascentix Partners. But honestly, Marla, I really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to our next interaction. So continued success to you and to Nomi.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Listeners, what is one way you're building trust in your client relationships? What is one takeaway you're going to have as you're thinking about developing yourself, your business, and building trust with your clients? If you found something insightful in this podcast, please comment on it, like it, rate it in your favorite podcast app, share it with your friends, drop your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcasts, and we will see you next time. Thank you for joining us on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformative conversations to you. Until next time, keep discovering, keep growing, and remember, you're in control of your own financial story. Follow us for more conversations on financial confidence, self-discovery, and the future of money.